If you haven't already heard about Anchor, it's by far the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it could be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more of the most popular platforms to preview your podcast. You can make money for your podcast with no minimum listenership. And did I mention it's free? It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So stop what you're doing, start recording, and get paid for what you're saying. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to the UNNI Podcast. I'm your host, Bianca McCall, and today our journey begins in the fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, and it takes us across the globe to connect with heroes in their own rights in the space of suicide prevention to help us reach a cure for suicide. Welcome back to the UNNI Podcast. Today we have a special treat. Never done before on the UNNI Podcast. We're bringing back Melissa Lunardini from episode 3. And we have Colin here with us today, who is a loss survivor, joining us to offer the views and the powerful voice of a young person impacted by suicide. So Colin, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. Melissa, welcome back to the UNNI Podcast. Melissa, can you share a little bit about what life has been like, what work has been like since you were last on the UNNI Podcast?
Well, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be here again. I'm more excited to hear from what our other guest has to talk about today. But, what I've seen just so far is through this pandemic, just incredible loss and people really struggling, even if you're a professional, struggling with your own grief and being able to manage how to fill your own cup when you're giving so much to support others who are struggling as well. And I've seen a lot of kids and teens struggling with making in some cases, their senior year meaningful and powerful, and still strive to have that connection. So there's just been a tremendous sense of loss, but also of the beauty of that is that people are stepping up, and there's been a lot of hope and a lot of carriers of positivity and inspiration along the way. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Colin, the guest of honor here, will you please share with our listeners where you're calling from, who you are, how old are you, and what is your lived experience, and why is this conversation so important?
Hello, everyone. I'm Colin. I'm 18, and I'm from San Diego, California. And I recently just committed to University of California, Santa Cruz, with a proposed major of computer science. And my story is that I lost my father when I was 16, and I've been dealing with this grief journey ever since, learning more about what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are when it comes to how to grieve, when to grieve, and also just how to tell others that I'm grieving.
Mm-hmm. All right. And when you say you lost your father when you were 16, can you share with the listeners a little bit about what that experience was and what it was like for you?
All right. So backing up just a bit, my father had a history of mental illness, more specifically bipolar depression. So, and I didn't really figure this out until maybe I was 15, maybe early 16, that he actually suffered from this. And at that time, I didn't really know what it meant. So over the year of 2017, he had become more distant, not really showing up to family events, just sort of getting home and then just staying in his room. So it was January 2018, and he had an incident at work where he had broken one of the doors, just sort of angry at something. And from there, he was expecting to be fired. Like worst case scenario, he thought he was going to get fired. Mm-hmm. So he, in his own mind, he starts panicking because he had previously stated to my mom that he felt his only purpose within his family is to pay the bills and, like do other things around the house. Mm-hmm. So with one of those things gone, it's like, what's my purpose now? Sort of lost a piece of himself with that. So he was expecting a package from his work that was very, very light, which ultimately to him signified his termination letter. Mm-hmm. So that day I go off to school, and halfway through that, I text him just like an image I found of one of the bands that we used to listen that we listened to. They were going on their like farewell tour, so it's like, this sucks. Like, why can't it had been like this band? So, and then from that he's like, yeah, it sucks. And then I don't hear from him the rest of the day. And then I get home at around 2, and my mom and my brother are both there, and they're looking at me. It's like actually just like staring at me for a minute. I'm like, what's going on? And my mom informs me that my dad had run away with the pistol that he kept in his gun safe. Mm-hmm. So from there, we're just trying to figure out, anything we can, like trying to get access to credit cards, banks, registering his car as being stolen, just to get to find my iPhone, anything, just trying to like track him down and see what's up, and if we can hear from him. And then so that continues the whole night. And then I opted to stay home from school and just stay with my mom that day. And multiple times throughout that day, she would like sit me down and like say, "Oh, do you really think he would go through with this?" And then later that day, we got like the confirmation call that he had gone through with the suicide and he was no longer with us. And right when I figured that out, I immediately started I broke down really, because I had formed a connection with him. Like, we had done lots of things together. He introduced me to like things that he was interested in, like the music he was interested in, the sports, and we had really like grown close through those two things. And so just to like hear that, it really like broke me down and it got to me. And then from there, my family started attending group family sessions at the Elizabeth Hospice, which later involved me just going to the teen sessions at the Elizabeth Hospice and just truly learning like what I should be feeling, and like learning from other people what they're experiencing and connecting that to my own experience, allowing others to share and myself to share, and then giving insight to other people as they're grieving.
Gosh, we spoke about it briefly before, and my first thought was to say, I'm sorry for your loss. And then I thought to myself, gosh, that sounds pretty cliche. But what do you say? What does someone say, to a family member and to a young person who's just lost their father? Do you have an answer for that? What do you want to hear at that point?
I've been going through this for like 2.5 years, and when someone says like, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," I still really don't know how to respond, because like typically when someone says they're sorry for something else, you're like, "Oh, okay, let's move on." But
right.
You can't really move on from this. It's still going to be affecting you for the rest of your life. I don't really think. While it's sort of just a sign of like respect, I don't really feel like there's going to be a universal like thing you can say to make that situation of learning someone's loss to be like better.
Oh, great point. There's like this underlying expectation for you to quickly move on. And we know from our previous conversations with Melissa and in talking with you that, that's an unrealistic expectation for a young person just to move forward. And so along those lines, what does the grief process look like, and how immediate do you realize that you're now in a process? Like, does that go across your mind? Like, now I got to start the grief process.
You're not going to start it. It's just going to appear. You might like pick up on like sort of behaviors and mannerisms that you have that relate to a certain grief thing. But that the whole cycle, really, you're going to be at different stages at different points, really. Mm-hmm. So I found myself like straight into the denial phase. I mean, I think that lasted very, very, very long. Like, we had me and my mom, and my sister were visiting my brother in San Antonio, and she had mentioned like dad's like dead or something like that, and like I still didn't really like fully process that at that moment, and that was 9 months, and like I was still like oh like there's like he's still here, like just believing in that, and not really like coming in full terms that he was dead at that point.
Yeah. How much do you remember in the first 9 months? Like you're saying, you know, if you're in denial, how much of that time do you actually remember?
I mean, not that much really. I sort of like just went through like a withdrawal really when it came to like my academics. Like I put academics on the back burner. I was just trying to like, you know, like bring myself up really.
So with that being said, you know, how does one balance? So you said that you're 16 years old. So I'm assuming you've got 16-year-old, you know, life responsibilities almost, you know, right? So you've got school, are you learning to drive? Like all the things that you have as being a 16-year-old. How do you balance all of that in the midst of like a denial stage or phase of grief?
As far as balance, I always knew that my schoolwork was a responsibility, and I definitely like put that first. And then I found myself getting like more attached to the clubs that I was previously in. Like at that time, we were running for officer positions for one of the clubs, and I opted to drop out because there was no way I could, within like the first week of learning of my dad's death, that I could have gone through with any sort of like activity like that, like going through a whole like election process, running a speech, things like that. But over time, I found myself getting more connected to certain clubs that I was in. I really got closer with my friends at that point, and I just tried to like live each day and just try not to like worry about that, because I had a certain space at the time to where I'd really like go in and deal with my grief.
Sure. How would you compare those relationships that grew stronger, like with your friends and groups and things? How would you compare that with your relationships with your immediate family during that time?
I feel like we all got like really close, and we were able to talk about this like as a family, obviously through the sessions that we did for a short amount of time, but also like talking about how group was, what we sort of focused on. And then even like later on, like I had an instance where one of the groups had like really like got to me, and I started like breaking down in the car, and then we finally like we came to like a resolution like just within the car, like just within like pretty much a 15-minute drive. Like I had like come to accept it. And then after that instance, I called my brother and I called some of my friends just like dealing with it, and they were like, hey, like this is like the amount of I think it was about like time spent and just seeing like seeing someone's like mental health or even their physical health like deteriorate over time. That kind of got to me. So it was a matter of like just like time and just like oh, I wish I could have like seen the signs and everything. But from that, I learned that like no matter like what position you were in, you could have like never known this would have been the outcome. And that's like a really like positive like takeaway from that, like realizing like you were at your best that you could have been at that point, and not like blaming yourself, not having guilt, which was really one of the big things that impacted me within like the first year and a half of my grief.
Yeah. So, in thank you so much. I might just overthank you throughout this entire interview, because all of this information is just so important. One of the things that I want to ask you is, what did that therapeutic process look like? So you're talking about joining in groups. Did you have some individual sessions, just one-on-one, also family sessions?
The family sessions were me, my mom, my brother, and my sister at the time. And that was from about February to March of 2018, before my brother had gone off to the boot camp, because before this even happened, he was enlisted in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to go off the boot camp literally not even 3 months after he just going through a traumatic experience.
Right.
So from that, we started doing the sessions, and it was mainly just like this one board game that related to grief. I don't remember mainly the specifics of it.
Sure.
I think it was just like this activity where you just you roll dice and you pick up a card related to some sort of thing related to grief, and you just answer based off of that. Mm-hmm. And then some of the other sessions were just me and my brother in a room, just talking. Mm-hmm. And that was just it sort of was the structure of it was one-on-one, but it was just with us two. And then I think it was April that I started moving into the group sessions.
Okay.
And how those run is that Melissa was an advisor at that time for the Elizabeth Hospice teen group here in Escondido. Mm-hmm. And it was a room that could range from 7 to 15 kids. Mm-hmm. And we all sort of sit down, introduce each other, how old we are, what how our significant other had died, how our family member or friend or just anybody within our lives that was meaningful to us had passed. Mm-hmm. And then from there's a designated topic that we talk about for that week. So it can be such things as coping mechanisms, honoring your person, bringing in some sort of memorabilia about your person. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we sort of just all talk about it. We all have our own talking points from it. You can opt to not share, which I found myself doing the first couple of months just because it was a new environment. I just like to be really observant. Mm-hmm. at that point. And I find myself being an observant person, sort of listening before speaking. Uh-huh. But after the first year, I'd become comfortable because they had their own little thing there where you can just be sarcastic when they needed to, and just have their little running jokes with each other. Yeah. So I found myself getting used to that and putting my own input, which it would lead to me sharing more within the group sessions.
Yeah. And so Melissa, great point to kind of bring you into the discussion. If you can help paint the picture of what that structure of those group sessions are like, what you typically see from new members and how consistent that is with Colin's experience.
Sure. So, the group structure that we adhere to is very easy to implement anywhere. Which I think is the first thing to know. They're 90-minute group sessions. We held them bi-weekly, so every other week, or bi-monthly, however you'd like to say it, for 90 minutes. And there is the way that it's broken down is there's always an intro where we say our name, our age, who died, and how they died. And that's it's an invitation to let people know who's in the room. It also helps with one of the first tasks of mourning, William Worden's first task of mourning, which is accepting the reality of the death. So when you can get comfortable letting people know who died and how they died, it actually helps you kind of rehearse your storyline. Mm-hmm. So one of the points that Colin had talked about is I'm learning how to tell people about my death. Mm-hmm. Being able to practice saying my dad died by suicide really helps that process when they come in front of a stranger or somebody that's new to them, to be able to have that already fully practiced and rehearsed and have said it enough to where the shock value for them themselves is gone. Right. And then after that, we do have a theme, but with teens, we always also let them decide the theme too. So I may think I have the perfect theme and I'll throw it out to the group, and then the teens will give me a look like, you done lost your mind, or you're so not relevant right now. And then I will open the floor and just be like, okay, so what is relevant today? Yeah. And just give them the space to kind of own whatever it is that they need to talk about in that moment. We also have snacks because, the best way to a teen is through their stomach. And And then, we try to build in based off of the group that night. Do they need free time, which is space to just connect that's away from the group, away from grief work?
Mm-hmm.
And we try to build that in if it's needed. Sometimes teens just want to stay and young adults, they just want to stay and just hit the topic and hammer it, and the topics and themes just kind of roll into each other. And other times it's just a rough day. It's a long day. They're tired. They're not wanting to do grief work, because that happens too. Just because it's a Thursday at 6:30 and that's grief group doesn't mean that you're wanting to do grief work.
Right.
So sometimes they're just like, can we do like a night off of grief, or can we just like do this and hurry it along so that we can go and actually like just bond and connect with our people.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of group, is that it gives you a space where you can connect with people who you don't, without question, that they know what grief is like. They don't know what your grief is like until you tell them and let them in, but they understand what grief feels like when it comes to a death.
Okay.
And then we do a closing ceremony, a way to always kind of bring the group back in a space to honor their person who died. Because sometimes families and people will do that just naturally in their own space. And then sometimes they don't do it at all, or they've never been taught or given permission. And so we make sure to always have like a candle lighting ceremony where they can honor their person who died, or somebody who's living but going through a hard time.
Okay. I've got a few questions for you. So my first thought or question is, are these inclusive in terms of the type of death that the young person is experiencing? And so would a Colin find himself in a group with other youth that are loss survivors as well? And then my next kind of leading into the next question is, how do you tell the difference as a group facilitator between a young person who is, like Colin explained or expressed, being observant, in these initial group meetings? How do you tell the difference between observant and like a dangerous withdrawal, or something that's associated with the denial that Colin shared with us, just kind of being withdrawn and wanting to isolate?
Or even I will add like just a complete checkout, like maybe they were forced to be there.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So there are groups. So Colin happened to be in what we would consider like a blended group. So they had different types of losses in there. So it could be cancer, suicide, homicide, car accident, a variety. We've also, and other centers nationwide do provide this. There's also what we would deem like a specialty loss group, which means that everybody in that group has a similar loss. So for example, a suicide only loss group, where you've had to have a loved one die by suicide, or somebody important to you die by suicide in order to enter into that group. So I think that per agency, they are able to set up whatever they deem necessary. I think most suicide loss survivors would agree that there's extreme value in being in a group just with other suicide loss, because it gives you a level of permission to do more of what I would say like the darker side of grief work, being able to talk about graphics and details and experiences that maybe can feel alarming to other peers that don't know that kind of death. But then there's also value in being in a general loss group, just because you're able to see that any type of death carries very similar like trajectories and experiences and symptoms. And so it lets you kind of also know that, okay, yes, suicide loss feels different, but I'm also hearing somebody whose mom died from cancer, and she's talking about she's using the same language I would use.
Right.
And so there's benefits in both, I would say.
Okay. And so before we get into that second part of the question of how you tell the difference between observant and withdrawn, Colin, can you speak to what Melissa just shared about the differences between the groups, and what did you think about being in that blended group scenario?
I definitely drew some similarities to how I was dealing with the situation to others. I found myself like sort of I'm trying to word this. I found myself giving insight into other people's like grief stories about how I dealt with the situation that they were in and how I sort of learned from it. And that blending group gave a lot of different points on like where people were within the griefs. So some people had the ability to, you know, say their goodbyes to their loved ones, and some, you know, some didn't have the opportunity. So you learn like what that experience, learning like the moment they had passed, like the differences between say, you know, someone that was there and someone that had just learned that like from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But another, I should have, I don't know if this would have came up, but I was also involved with the camp that Melissa had ran to, Camp Aaron at one point, and then Camp Sparrow at the other point. And then those are specifically like suicide only, in my case, groups. So the first year was just very heavy, just like group grief work with boys my age, maybe like 15 to 17.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we spent like that was like a lot of grief work at that like stage, because it was there was 4 of us and then 2 like facilitators, and I think 5 out of the 6 of us. Now I know for sure all of the teens had dealt with a suicide loss, but I'm not sure if the facilitators have. I think maybe I'm not too sure, but it just brings that level of like bonding, like very very like intimate, like bonding over our situation, and also just like being able to tackle like other scenarios that most teen boys face. Like, how do I express my emotions? How do I like dissolve the stereotype that we have to like, you know, man up and be able to like share our emotions with others, be able to like be vulnerable in that moment. I found that was like different than the blended group, but both are similarly like impactful in their own ways.
Yeah, no. So, gosh, this kind of sounds like the ideal situation for guiding your young person through the grief processes, right? You experienced the loss of your father. How soon after the loss were you already engaged in doing the therapy and the groups, and how soon after?
I was kind of hesitant to start doing grief work, because you typically like you view therapy and like people are just like walking out of there crying. They're just broken down. And I didn't want to feel that way, so I was kind of hesitant. And I think it was about a month after we had sort of simultaneously agreed to do this, and I walked out of the section. I was like, okay, that was manageable. I can do this. And then the one-on-one, like the group sessions with just me and the other teens, that's where I felt like I was really like diving deep and learning more about the grief process, and like that it's not definitive. There's like multiple aspects of grief. And then that was about like 3 months after it. And then from there, I just felt like really comfortable like doing that as how I managed my father's death, my own grief, like how I sort of adapt to this new way of life.
Okay, and since you participated in both the blended groups and the specialty groups, was that at the same time, or was there like a graduated process?
My school counselor had recommended the camp to me.
Okay.
And that's just it was like a summertime camp for 3 days, I believe. And from there you do like a lot of like grief work, but it's also structured as like a summer camp. So you're able to like have fun, do the traditional like summer camp things, like just like bond with others, you know, stay in a cabin, things like that. So that was like the specialty group side of things. But then the blended group was more of just like the regular, like the bi-weekly thing that I could look forward to, you know, share how I'm feeling from last week's group to like this week's group, and just be like really like vulnerable there, and then also have the time where this is like at the specialty group where it's like, okay, these are people that are similar to me. This is where I'm going to do a lot of my grief work and learn a lot.
Yeah. Well, gosh. And I mean, have to take this moment as kind of a checkpoint in our interview and mention how remarkable, this journey is and has been. You have put in so much work. I mean, you're talking to me. I mean, you made your personal health, your job, your main responsibility on top of, having this balance between just normal 16-year-old life, and being able to enjoy a normal kind of camp experience. I mean, it's blowing my mind over here, how remarkable and how resilient, you have been on this journey. And so I'm very impressed, Colin, very impressed. And thank you again for sharing this, these elements of your story. Melissa, if we can go back to you and then address that question of how do you tell the difference between observant and withdrawn?
Sure. I mean, so I think that you have to know somebody a little bit in order to be able to tell, because there are so many faces and intricate faces of grief. Mm-hmm. But in a side layer to that is that there's also the face of uncertainty and who are you? Can I trust you? Can I vibe with you with my story? Can you handle my story face? Mm-hmm. And so kids and teens coming in for one-on-one session or for group work, like I've always trained professionals to not expect to get an invitation into the deep work right away. You have to build rapport. You have to build a sense of safety and community. Mm-hmm. And so that really requires you to open up and share and expose a portion of you to let that child or teen know that like you're vibing with them and that you like understand that being here is not ideal, right? Yeah. But we're going to make the best of it the best way we can. So like, to me, sometimes a withdrawn face or disposition in group could tell me a bunch of different things. And it's my job to dissect what it is. It could be the group's not a good fit for them. There are people that are group people, and then there are people that are one-on-one people. And that's just a fact, right? And so that would be one of my first things to try and figure out. Do groups work for you, or do you prefer one-on-one? Mm-hmm. If they're like, oh no, groups are fine, then I'm like, all right, next box. Yeah. Are you connecting with anybody in the group? And if they're brand new, their disposition could just be out of shyness, out of uncertainty, out of not feeling bonded, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is, are they vibing with you? Because you could be the problem. I think a lot of professionals myself included, your ego can get hurt when you're not the one that they choose to open up to, right? Like you're sitting here going like, well, but I have all this knowledge and I have all this experience and I think I'm rad and like kids normally vibe with me. What's up? The truth of the matter is somebody just may not connect with you, and that's okay. It's my job, and my groups in particular, I'm never the sole facilitator. I will always have multiple people in the room of various different personalities, ages, backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So that way, if they're not connecting with me, I'm hoping that they're going to connect with one of the other facilitators in the space. Mm-hmm. Because connecting with an appropriate adult is part of resiliency building, right? And we need to make sure that we're addressing that. And then the other thing is I think once you get to know somebody, I think a lot of people will say that, eyes tend to be a window into the soul, and you can look at somebody to see if they're really struggling or not. Like people who have even just a few years of clinical experience can look at a child or a teen, and if your radar is going up, if your intuition is off, then you just do a check-in. I mean, there were times in groups where Colin may have felt off to me, and I might just go up to him and just be like, yo, what's up? What's new? Like, let me get at you for a little bit. Let me talk to you. What's going on in your world? And that's my way of gently saying, like, you're not yourself right now. Like, what's up? Bring me in. Like, mm-hmm. Talk to me. Instead of going like, what's wrong with you? Like, is there something wrong with you? Did you have a bad day? It's like, you have to get very crafty with how you do your check-ins with teens and young adults, and figure out what is really at the point of their disposition. So mm-hmm. I would say, is there, are they group people? Are they comfortable and bonded? Mm-hmm. Is it you? or and if it's a very clinical issue, you should know that in your assessment leading up. Do they have a clinical history of depression or any other mental illness or are they on medication, or is there anything that, you should be mindful of before they come into group?
Yeah. And, in group work too, from my own experience, there's got to be some empowerment, from the group participants as well, an empowerment element, meaning that the responsibility is not just on the group facilitator to, conduct all those assessments, right? But Colin, you had the responsibility of, making the choice really of whether or not you wanted to engage and participate, So Colin, kind of shifting the conversation back to you, how did you keep yourself from kind of taking that relaxed way out of, I'm just going to withdraw, or I'm going to focus on the sadness? What helped you to make the decision to say, I'm going to confront this and do this work?
Just being around others that were doing the same thing, because they allowed themselves to be vulnerable. And within that, I felt like it was appropriate that I could, share what I was feeling, share some insight into this talking point, or within like the check-ins, if someone's like, if I'm feeling the same way that someone else is feeling, I can sort of just, give them some advice, or I could just, start a new talking point based on what I was going through. Mm-hmm. So I feel like being around others and just sort of like, how I said, being observant, like finding that moment where I feel like I can jump in and I can add to a conversation or even start one.
Yeah. How honest were you able to be in these types of groups, Colin? Like, do you feel like you were able to go in and and say, if you were having a shitty day, like I'm having a shitty day, like how honest could you be?
I was able to be 100% like raw, honest, like no really like no holds barred. Like I could say like whatever was on my mind at that point. Obviously with some limitation. No, actually no. Like I've been like very, very like upfront how I'm feeling. Like I'm not doing good. I'm at a high right now. I could be like at any one of those points, and I wouldn't have to restrict myself with just saying like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm doing all right." Like I could be like really raw going into what's causing like anger or sadness at this point, and what's been like really uplifting right now. Like what have I learned in these past 2 weeks that has been something to hold on to from a point of happiness or a point of sadness, and share it with the group.
Can you, looking back now a couple of years, can you look back and say, gosh, I really surprised myself with the way I was feeling, that day or during that time? Do you ever look back and say, wow, like I've come this far and I can't believe that I was kind of in this place?
Yeah. I think shortly before I went to the alumni camp of last year, like summer last year, I was on a call with a couple of friends, and I was just we were just hitting some hard topics, just dealing with like relationships and just like things along those lines, and then it eventually like transitioned to me talking about like, oh, I felt like I didn't have enough time with my dad, and then my friend just sort of like saying like, hey, you could have like never known like this was gonna happen. You take what you have, you take the moments and experiences that you have, and you build off of them. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I really thought I would never recover from like feeling of, oh, I didn't have enough time. But now I realize that like I take what's within that time and I use it to build myself. And like that's the moment where I really like look back on and say like it can get better from here. Yeah. Like you have the ability to grow. And like I took that moment with me to camp that year, and I shared that like, hey, like what you take that you'll never know like the time that you have with somebody. Mm-hmm. So like enjoy that time in the moment, but also enjoy the time in the past, and don't expect something in the future. Like always just live in the moment.
Yeah. I've got a couple of tough. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to add what I love and what I think it's important to highlight here is that we sometimes don't give adolescents, teens, their peers like the credit that they deserve. Sometimes, you know, your friends can give you the best solid advice that you need in that moment that another adult could never give you. And so I think it's so important to respect both like forms of support, not only leaning into your peers, so your friends, because they know how to like really help you out when you're going through a hard time with some solid advice, but also to not only take your friend's advice, because sometimes it may not always be solid, right? And that's where having like some adults that you trust in your life to come in and fill those gaps. But I think it's so important to recognize that teens give really great advice often.
Yeah, agreed, and great point. It actually is a great segue into the couple of tough questions that I have for both you and Colin. And so, Melissa, we'll start with you. My tough question is that we all know in working with young people, working with families, and working in systems, that the fear of contagion is real, and it happens to be a significant or pose a significant barrier in adults being able to respond appropriately. You know, when we're talking about suicide loss specifically, you know, when there's a suicide loss in a school, the school's response is, you know, let's quietly and quickly move forward, which is inconsistent with how a young person grieves, right? The process of the grieving process. But we do that because we are afraid that contagion will occur, and just talking about suicide will cause greater suicidal risk. And then putting a group of people that are impacted by suicide loss to those people that have fear of contagion, it's like, like, what do you mean you have specialty groups with young people talking about their suicide loss? Can you speak to that a little bit and you know, kind of answer that question that I think is in a lot of people's minds is, do specialty groups having to do with suicide, do they pose a risk for contagion?
Yeah. And, you know, I would even also include this idea of contagion in the family system, because, right, we haven't necessarily have like this solid concrete research around there being a hereditary link to suicide. But I know, and I'm sure Colin can remember, there have been several times where I asked Colin very directly, like, has suicide ever been a thought in your mind? Because I think the first place we have to address this idea of contagion is within the family unit once a suicide has taken place. It is the most teachable moment in that space to do a check-in with everybody in the family. Like, have you thought about it? Has it crossed your mind? You know, would that ever be a path that you would consider? So there, and then this idea of, you know, having a group with suicide specific people, and could that cause this idea of contagion? I would say there's always risk with anything that we do, right? There's nothing that is going to be 100% risk free, but facilitator's role or an agency's role is to definitely do a pre-assessment of everybody, get a really good idea of who's in the group, and do they have a history of mental health issues? Do they have a good support system? Do they have a history of self-harm or anything that could be linked to a potential future down the road or current thoughts of suicide, right? And it's been my experience, because I've been in suicide-specific groups, that the topics that come up are not what probably people think about, right? A lot of it is like outward stuff. So of course they're doing a lot of internal stuff, like, oh, this is how I feel, this is what I went through. But really a lot of the topic is like, can we talk about how other people don't know how to fucking respond to me? Can we talk about how other people don't know how to support me? Like, how do we manage that? How do we manage how other people are struggling with this? Because I can only do so much if I have to go it alone, because other people are just so uncomfortable. And that's not to say that we don't get people who are actively struggling in a suicide group that need additional help. And it's our job as facilitators, right, to shepherd that or companion that and see that through extra support, whether that be if it needs to be inpatient care or getting them connected with one-on-one or anything like that. We definitely do. But kids and teens and young adults in suicide groups are not talking about suicide planning, right? They're not that's not part of what has, in my experience, come up. And I think most teens in particular are very aware of a lot of the different methodology of how somebody could die.
Sure.
So, by gun, by hanging, by jumping, by various different means. And so being introduced to those means in a group setting, odds are you're aware of those various means if you're in a suicide group.
Yeah.
And I think maybe Colin could speak to that like by the time you're a teen, and this is different with children, but by the time you're a teen, you're pretty well versed in ways that you can kill yourself.
Yeah.
And so if the desire is there and there's a plan and there's access to the plan and all of those things are there, they would not be group appropriate anyway. Right. They would be far more riskier population and not be in an emotional stability state in order to be in a group.
Yeah. Well, and you actually asked the tough question that I wanted to pose to Colin. If you felt comfortable sharing, Colin, I was going to ask you the same thing. During your process of grief and after the loss of your father, had you ever had thoughts of suicide for yourself?
This one is obviously hard to address because I know firsthand what suicide leads to. It leads to, a complete, it leads to the breakdown of a family at some point. I saw firsthand the amount of people that my father had impacted and just how impactful his life was and the impact that he left on people, as they were visiting, as they were sharing moments of just, remembrance with him. With him in the picture, I had multiple people stop by my house and just, say how wonderful of a father he was and just, how involved he was with his friends and just how friendly he was, how he'd always have a smile on his face, always cracking jokes. Mm-hmm. So I see that loss on a personal level. And from that, I learned that I could never go through such action. While I might think that in this moment of time, there's maybe it gets worse, but I could never go through it with any action just because I know the impact that it will leave, and I don't want to have that burden on anybody that I've connected through, whether that be my family or just someone I interacted with just once in my entire life. The impact that I've had on people is too strong to let leave it to something that I did to myself that could have been resolved. It's not just, oh, I'm gonna feel this way forever. I'm just gonna feel this way for now. It's gonna get better, and I feel like I've truly learned that. And from that, I know I can never go through with it.
Yeah.
And can I just add in too that although it's refreshing from a mental health professional's point of view to hear this side from Colin, right? That this idea that I know that mass destruction and I could never put my pain on somebody else.
Right.
The other harsh and hard reality to contend with is that I also see a lot of teens who do actively attempt after a death of a suicide, and that is a very real possibility. And I think that the onus is on every adult in that child's life and that in those peers and the teen to be able to continue asking questions, have dialogue, not making the assumption that just because somebody isn't currently suicidal, they're not ever going to be that way again. I see that a lot with families who get over an initial hump of oh, they were just depressed. We talked it through, or they went inpatient for 5 days, or they're on medication now, so we're in the clear. And it's well, suicidal thoughts, thinkings, attempts, things like that. It's an ongoing open highway lane. And it's all of our responsibility to keep asking questions, checking in, making sure that these children know that we see them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I also think, for those families or for those listeners that are experiencing the latter, of what you described, where there's some active gestures or suicidality that their youth is experiencing. I think that this, Colin sharing his story offers kind of the positive side of that grief process and that healing process, because we're able to see when we, get you quickly engaged in a therapeutic process or quickly linked to peers that are trusted and empowered, right? And along with some safe adults, that are kind of acting as a conduit between, widening that access to resources. And then when you've got, your young person that's actually doing the work, and opening up and allowing himself to be vulnerable and processing and coming out of denial and really processing what has happened and how his own life has been impacted, then you get to see the remarkable, results and outcomes of, Colin, you have this great insight of, hey, I see that this is destructive of the family unit, of the family system. And you have made that choice to not do that, to not replicate that destruction. And so, again, thank you, Colin, for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is good stuff. So I'm an 80s baby. Okay. I won't say my age, but I'm an 80s baby. I love Back to the Future. And so I consider Back to the Future as kind of the base manual for how I conduct life. Right. And Back to the Future makes me remember when I was, 16, 17, 18, how life was. The most important things in my life were what others were doing, how others felt, about me. And this whole searching for my identity, was my main goal, at that age. And so when we talk about a subject like suicide, how much about suicide do you think is about how other people are think of you or are reacting to you as a young person?
Can you rephrase that question?
Sure. I probably lost you at Back to the Future because that's the most.
Yeah. I was like, is she gonna ask me like some form of media or something? Like, we're gonna have to
well,
answer.
so yeah. I mean, and I think that we can talk about kind of like social media and popular culture. What's popular to young people, but how much of the young person's experience, like if you're having, kind of the crappy experiences or you're confused and things like that, how much of that has to do with other people and how they view you?
I feel like maybe not myself to this point. I mean, back in the day, I obviously cared about how other people perceive me, but a lot of teens they gain their self-worth through other people. They don't recognize what their powers are. They put the power in the hands of other people, and they let the people have power over them. They make most of their decisions based off of other people, like based off their friends. They don't really have the ability to think for themselves in most scenarios. I feel like teens or even like young adults, they shape their whole lives around what other people view. Like other people's like viewpoints, like other people's standards. So when it comes to the case of suicide, I feel as if people are more involved with like how you are doing in particular. They don't really want to go into the details of like the experience itself. They want to check in on you, and really just like give their condolences and just see like what they can do to help.
Yeah. How? Oh yeah, Melissa.
I was just going to ask a question around that. Also, the whole identity thing. So suicide carries a lot of stigma, which means that some people may have very strong opinions about it, right? Like some people. And because there's strong opinions around suicide, families are instantly faced with this idea. Should I tell people the truth about how my person died, or should I not tell them the truth about it? And should we make up something else, right? So early on, when your dad died by suicide, was there ever a thought in your mind or your family's mind to not tell people the truth about what happened to your dad? Or were you guys committed? Because I feel like people who are committed to telling the truth end up being very powerful voices and advocates in the realm of suicide, because they're pretty much taking a charge, going like, I don't care about your stigma, I care about the truth.
We didn't deny what had happened. We were full on like confrontational, like this, like he had died by suicide. We weren't going to say anything else. We might have sheltered my sister at that time because she was very, very young. She knows how he has died now, but I feel as if the like right when we found out, I feel like we should have sheltered her, and then we introduced the topic of how he had passed, and she just picked up on it. And but we were very like head on with how he died. We had no intentions of sort of like sugarcoating it, making it seem like less of a tragedy than it was. We wanted people to be fully aware, like this has happened, and this is what we're going through.
Yeah, no, great question, Melissa. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of secrecy which surrounds suicide, and all that does is kind of perpetuate this cultural rule that people are supposed to suffer in silence, and so communicating, confronting it, as Colin mentioned, is really the only way to break that cycle, that does nothing but increase, what we're seeing in terms of tragedy in families' lives. Colin, real quick too, in our prior conversation, you had mentioned a time where you had a conversation with a friend's mom and her words really impacted you. And I wanted to share that with the listeners.
So, right, like maybe a couple hours after I'd learned the news of my father's passing, I went off with a friend to his house because they lived like just down the street. Mm-hmm. So it was, and they were, we were in her driveway, and she just said to me that like this is going to be like one of the hardest experiences you're going to ever face. Like right now, you don't think things are going to ever look up, but just know that from this experience, you're going to be able to grow and evolve into someone that was way more powerful and they were at one point. Like you're gonna learn a lot from this. It's gonna be hard, it's gonna be challenging, but you're gonna come out of this stronger than you've ever been. And I still take those words to heart today and recognize that I have the ability to use my voice to impact others and to communicate strong points that I have and be able to share and provide insight. So like that experience right there and a couple of others, like the one I previously mentioned with my friends, have really like stuck to me, and I've done a lot of my work around that.
Very good, very good. Colin, will you also share with the listeners? Are there any groups or programs or anything that even you can participate in today? That would be an excellent resource for other young people that are going through a grieving process from a loss or dealing with suicide loss specifically?
One that I recommend is any sort of like group facility, like the Elizabeth Hospice. Anything that has the group structure, or even just like one-on-one structure, I feel like that's like really really impactful. And also just something similar to like a grievance camp, like a grievance summer camp, is like as I know like firsthand, since I was one of the advisors on like the camp, that those can have like you can do a lot of your grief work there, and so any like group work, any like one-on-one work, anything where there's somebody who wants to hear from you and wants to help you, and a place where you're able to share, is something that I recommend to anyone dealing with like the grieving process.
Awesome.
And really quickly, you also did a few assignments out in school, right? That had to do with sharing your story in some capacity. Did you do any assignments?
My personal statements to colleges is where it was really like hitting hard on that topic. So all of my like essay structures really like hit home on like my experience and what I did to like really like combat that situation and like learn from that situation. So it was definitely related to school, not like a mandatory assignment. It's just how I chose to structure essays for college. So like this experience is with me like all the time, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask. You mentioned that you at the alumni camp that you were an advisor. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, like, what type of peer work are you doing currently? You know, do you allow for other young people to reach out to you and that sort of thing, or what are you doing in the peer space?
I'm trying to, just see maybe in the future, just like what I can do. I was planning on being one of like the facilitator, like best buddy things that they have at camp this year, but I'm not sure with this whole pandemic crisis that we're in, if that'll go through. And plus location too, so I'm going to be up north. If I'll even have the ability, I'll try to see just like anything I can do to really like get my story out. Even just like the like clubs on campus, or just dealing with like maybe a social work on campus, trying to see what resources are available to me. Like I still want to be like very involved in this.
Sure. And are you open to, like, if we've got listeners that are young people or family members that want more information or just kind of, a point in the right direction of where to go, are you open to receiving kind of like messages on social media or anything like that from our listeners?
I love to provide any insight into like what people are going through, like giving some advice. If they have any like further questions, then from what I've said, like in the podcast, I'd be more than open to, sharing some more insight and just allowing people to, like share their story and, have like someone else that they can share their story to.
Yeah, no, very cool. So Colin, with that being said, will you share on the air what your handle is or email or anything like that if somebody wants to reach out to you?
You can contact me on like Instagram. It's at C.0 and then LIN. So it's my name, but just like .0 and then LIN. So it's spelled out Colin. There, just feel free to get in contact with me if you so desire. I'll be more than willing to like answer any questions or just like have a small chat.
So I'm going to translate that. If I wasn't an 80s baby, I would say hit him on IG if you want to reach out to Colin. And then also you can go to the UNNIWell.com website or any of our podcast preview platforms and comment or contact us. And if you want to get in touch with Colin, I will make it happen too. But Colin, thank you so much for your sharing your story today. I'm so jazzed and juiced that we've got young men like you out there that are, great peer support, doing great things in your community and modeling kind of just the positive side, the positive aftermath of such a tragic event, showing that it's possible, giving hope to generations after you. I mean, it's just awesome. It's awesome. Melissa, will you, thank you. Melissa, will you share any additional resources or anywhere that people can contact if they want to have a similar experience of success like Colin?
Yes, and can I also just hit a few of I've been pulling down some major talking points that we always tell professionals and parents to be mindful of when it comes to supporting young teens and young adults, which is like when it comes to saying I'm sorry, that you can diversify that by just saying I'm here for you. But the main thing is to acknowledge me and my loss. Mm-hmm. Also, there's no timeline. And sometimes for kids and teens, the timeline is further along than you think. So he said that it took him about 9 months to even grapple with the thought that his dad had died forever. Right. So recognizing that their timeline is a lot longer than normal, and that distractions from friends are key and super helpful. It's not always a bad thing when they're not doing grief work. Sometimes they just need to be able to move in and out of it in their timing. And speaking of friends and support networks, like making sure that they do have peers and then they do have supportive adults is key. Engaging them in a therapeutic process 3 months or so out after a death is really critical. It's a good timeline to get involved. And it's okay to claim suicide as how your person died. It's okay to say it, and it's okay to even tell children about it. And then just to remember that grief is different for everyone. So Colin's experience will be dramatically different from my own experience with suicide loss than from other teens and young adults that experience it. And if you're looking for resources, I think one of the best ways to get just yourself informed, if you're a caregiver, you're a young adult, even currently, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a lot of free trainings. You can go to AFSP National, sign up. There's young adult trainings for teens and young adults coming up that are free virtually. There's things like Know the Signs, so how to actually even engage your children in a conversation or somebody else, a friend, a family member in suicide. You can go there. The Trevor Project for LGBTQIA population is all suicide specific. If you're looking for a peer-based grief support group, Survivors of Suicide Loss is a great contact. A lot of really great resources are available, and I'm happy to provide more if somebody wants to reach out to me as well at tribalgrief.com.
Tribalgrief.com to reach out to Melissa. Thank you so much. Those are great talking points and summarizing the awesome conversation that we had today. I'm going to end with a little bit of controversy. Colin, you said you're heading up north to Santa Cruz. Is that correct?
Yep.
So I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I grew up in Santa Rosa, California, and we are the north. We are the north, not Santa Cruz. We're a little further north than Santa Cruz. So I just started some territorial controversy for the listeners before heading off. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you again, Colin. Thank you again, Melissa. This was a great conversation to have. I look forward to continuing to join efforts in the future. And Colin, I want to co-host at some point. So let's
I'd be more than willing to do that.
See, and you're a natural. You did amazing today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time today. I'm your host, Bianca McCall. Remember, connect, create, be constructive. Help me and the many others doing amazing things in the space of suicide prevention, and reach in to give permission to those in crisis to reach out. Please, I welcome for you to share your thoughts, your feelings, your efforts, or the efforts of others in your communities with me. Please, you can find me on YouTube, on IG, on Facebook, under my agency's name, Desert Rose Counseling Group, or you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Bianca McCall. We also have a website where we'll be posting our podcasts and updates on information. And until next time, stay safe, be well, be heroes.